Hate to break it to you, but this is what America's always been. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Roots Matter, the show where news, politics, secularism, and social justice collide. I'm your host, Cynthia, and let's get into it. So, I came across this interesting opinion piece that I wanted to do a commentary on. It's written by Robert Reich, and if you're not familiar with him, he's an American professor, author, lawyer, and political commentator. He worked in the administrations of President Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter, and he served as the Secretary of Labor in the cabinet of President Bill Clinton from 1993 to 1997. He was also a member of President Barack Obama's Economic Transition Advisory Board. So let's now get into the article. So this article is entitled, "They're Crying Because They're Sickened by What Happened to America." It was published on Alternet on February 2026. This article opens with a deeply human moment. A stranger recognizes Robert Reich on the street and tries to speak, and suddenly breaks down in tears. That moment becomes his lens for describing a country where many people feel overwhelmed, heartbroken, and ashamed of what they believe is happening to America. Reich says people are grieving over immigrant families being detained, humanitarian aid being cut off to vulnerable populations around the world, climate policy rollbacks, racist rhetoric in public life, and the growing influence of billionaires over politics and media. He describes a feeling that cruelty is becoming normalized and that democratic norms are eroding. I don't know what she wanted me to know, but I do know that lots of people are weeping these days. They're weeping for family members who have been arrested and abducted by ICE, for children arrested and imprisoned, even if their own families haven't been affected, for people murdered by ICE or Border Patrol. Grieving the children now dying around the world because they no longer have medicines that America used to provide through U.S. aid, or because they are starving in places of war or famine in which America is implicated. Crying for our planet being destroyed because Trump won't adhere to the Paris Agreement and promotes oil and coal and kills subsidies for solar and wind. In tears over the common decency that's being demolished as Trump reposts a video of the Obamas as apes, calls Somalian Americans garbage, and demands his name on an airport or train station in return for approving a vital transit project in New York. Lamenting an America being sacked with impunity by billionaires like Jeff Bezos, handing Melania Trump $28 million while slashing the Washington Post newsroom and laying off thousands of Amazon workers, at the same time raking in billions of dollars more. Or Elon Musk, planning AI data centers in space while his AI Grok floods X with sexual explicit images and promising to flood American politics with more of his money. And the shameless, wealthy, powerful men who abused young girls in Jeffrey Epstein's island retreat and New York townhouse. They're sobbing because they're sickened by what has happened to America. Cry, our beloved country. I understand the tears. I have wept too, but let's not just weep. But the article doesn't stay in despair. Reich argues that this moment of grief could also be a turning point. He says the United States was already headed down a dangerous road before Trump, toward widening inequality, corporate dominance in politics, and weakened democratic safeguards. Now, he believes the country has an opportunity to confront those deeper structural problems and rebuild a more just, democratic society. His message is that grief is understandable, but it must turn into action. He says, instead of ending in despair, Reich calls for transformation. He urges people not just to mourn what's happening, but to use this moment to rebuild, to reduce the power of money in politics, strengthen democracy, and recommit to civic education and shared democratic values. Well, dear viewer, as I always say, I have thoughts. So, Robert Reich's article is emotional, heartfelt, and clearly written from a place of real concern. I respect that. I understand the grief he's describing. People feeling like the country they believe in is slipping away. But here's where I want to gently, and maybe not so gently, challenge the framing. The pain people feel right now is real. The fear is real. The anger is real. But the idea that America has suddenly become cruel, oligarchic, or morally lost under Trump suggests that there was some long-standing era where the country was broadly just, humane, and democratic for everyone. History does not support that claim. America was built on racial violence and forced labor, not metaphorically, literally. Enslaved Black people were the economic engine of early American wealth. The land was taken from indigenous nations through broken treaties and warfare. The opportunity Reich talks about was never evenly distributed. For millions, America was not a dream. It was a system of extraction. So when we say America is being lost, we have to ask, lost for whom? After slavery came Jim Crow, legalized apartheid. Terror lynchings weren't rare events. They were public spectacles. Black communities were burned down, displaced, underwater, and robbed of wealth. Democracy existed on paper while entire populations were locked out of voting, housing, education, and safety. Cruelty is not a new political language here. It's an old one with a fresh coat of paint. Wright talks about billionaires looting the country, and he's right to call out the oligarchy. But robber barons controlling politics and industry isn't new either. The Gilded Age was defined by extreme wealth concentration, crushed labor unions, child labor, and corporate control over government. Today's tech billionaires aren't a glitch in the system. They are a modern version of an old American tradition: wealth at the top, struggle at the bottom, and politicians serving capital before people. Even in the so-called good old days, federal policy was engineering inequality, redlining blocked Black families from home ownership. Highways bulldozed Black neighborhoods. Wealth wasn't just uneven, it was deliberately redistributed upward and outward. So when people cry for the America they thought existed, I understand the emotion. But that version of America has always depended on who you were and where you stood in the hierarchy. Now, here's the part I agree with Reich's hope, but with caution. There have always been people fighting to make this country live up to its promises. Abolitionists, labor organizers, civil rights activists, indigenous water protectors, teachers, everyday people who refuse to accept injustice as normal. Progress didn't come from America being naturally good. It came from people forcing America to change. And here's the hard truth. Every gain has been met with backlash. Reconstruction was followed by Jim Crow. Civil rights was followed by mass incarceration, and every forward triggers forces determined to drag the country backward. That's not a temporary detour. That's a pattern. So while I appreciate Robert Reich's optimism about rebuilding, history forces us to sit down with something heavier. America has never naturally drifted towards justice. Every inch of progress has come from struggle, from protest, resistance, organizing, and people refusing to accept the status quo. And just as consistently, every step forward has been met with backlash designed to preserve power and hierarchy. That pattern matters because it tells us the crises we are in isn't simply a detour from a healthy democracy. It's a flare up of tensions that have always been embedded in the country's foundation. Racial hierarchy, economic exploitation, and political systems tilted towards the wealthy aren't new infections. They're chronic conditions. The grief Reich describes is real, but the many communities, especially Black, Indigenous, immigrant, and poor communities, this grief isn't new either. It's generational. It's inherited. It's the feeling of watching history repeat itself with different faces at the top and the same people absorbing the shock at the bottom. That doesn't mean hope is foolish. It means hope has to be honest. If we're going to talk about rebuilding, we can't frame this as a return to some earlier version of America that's worked just fine. It didn't work fine. It worked because others were excluded, exploited, or silenced. The question isn't how we restore America. The question is whether we're finally ready to confront the parts of our history we keep trying to skip over. Whether we're ready to admit that democracy here has always been incomplete, that freedom has always been conditional, and that equality has always been contested ground. Because if we don't tell the truth about where we've been, we'll keep mistaking recurring patterns for sudden decline. Reich is right about one thing. This moment is an opportunity, but not just to rebuild, to redefine, to build systems that have never actually existed at scale in this country. Systems don't rely on exploitation to function. Systems where democracy isn't an aspirational language, but lived reality. And history tells us that only happens when ordinary people decide that the version of America they've been handed is no longer acceptable, and they organize to demand something better. So yes, people are crying, but tears alone don't change history. Pressure does. Truth does. Collective action does. And if this moment is going to mean anything, it won't be because we finally recognize America was failing. It'll be because we finally decided to build something it has never fully been. That's the video, everyone. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Do you agree with my challenge to Reich's opinion? Do you think I'm completely off base and you have reasons why and want to tell me about myself? Or do you have a dimmer outlook than Reich and I combined? Make sure you let me know down in the comments section below. Also, make sure you like this video, share it on your social media platforms, subscribe to this channel, and hit the bell so you can get notifications every time I upload a new video or when I go live. And I'm going live every Sunday in February at 6 p.m. Central. Also, if you can please consider supporting this channel by becoming a patron. You can go to www.patreon.com/camglamming and select a tier starting at just $3 a month. And with that, my dear viewers, I like to say, stay grounded, stay informed, and remember, at the end of the day, the roots matter. Take care.